Someone has said that the resurrection of Jesus Christ is either one of the most wicked, vicious, heartless hoaxes ever foisted on the minds of human beings, or it is the most remarkable fact of history. There's no middle ground with the resurrection of Jesus. Either it's a colossal fabrication, or it is the most important fact of history. In this video, I'm going to look at the first and most obvious question that arises. Is the resurrection of Jesus Christ true? If it is true, then really significant questions arise. Like, what does it mean for us? And could it be that death, rather than being the end, is actually only just the beginning? Well, we'll have a look at those questions in my next video. But did Jesus really rise from the dead? Any attempt to answer that question must examine the original documents that put forward that claim. Amongst others, the account written by the Apostle John, one of Jesus' disciples, offers us a great deal of material to get started with. You'll find that John has put together the evidence he has in a succinct 600-word account, which is now chapter 20 of his Gospel. Let's read the first 18 verses of that chapter to get us going. Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the entrance. So she came running to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one Jesus loved, and said, "They've taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they've put him." So Peter and the other disciple started for the tomb. Both were running, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. He bent over and looked in at the strips of linen lying there, but didn't go in. Then Simon Peter came along behind him and went straight into the tomb. He saw the strips of linen lying there, as well as the cloth that had been wrapped around Jesus' head. The cloth was still lying in its place, separate from the linen. Finally, the other disciple, who had reached the tomb first, also went inside. He saw and believed. They still did not understand from Scripture that Jesus had to rise from the dead. Then the disciples went back to where they were staying. Now Mary stood outside the tomb crying. As she wept, she bent over to look into the tomb and saw two angels in white, seated where Jesus' body had been, one at the head and the other at the foot. They asked her, "Woman, why are you crying?" "They've taken my Lord away," she said, "and I don't know where they've put him." At this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but she didn't realize that it was Jesus. He asked her, "Woman, why are you crying? Who is it you're looking for?" Thinking he was the gardener, she said, "Sir, if you've carried him away, tell me where you've put him and I will get him." Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned toward him and cried out in Aramaic, "Rabboni," which means teacher. Jesus says, "Don't hold on to me, for I've not yet ascended to the Father. Go instead to my brothers and tell them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Mary Magdalene went to the disciples with the news, "I have seen the Lord." And she told them that he had said these things to her. John provides at least 4 areas of evidence to show us that Jesus really did rise from the dead. Firstly, he provides detailed evidence from eyewitnesses. If you look at the little details in verses 1 to 10, they just read like genuine eyewitness accounts. Details like who was running where and who got there first. Details like the location and the arrangement of the grave clothes and who noticed them and when. These are details I suspect my English teacher would have put a line through as being superfluous, as slowing down the action. But in this context, they add credibility to the account. This is not a made-up, fabricated story. The second type of evidence John provides is to show how the disciples clearly weren't expecting Jesus to rise from the dead. This is not wishful thinking or hysteria. Mary comes across as totally perplexed. How was it possible to mislay a dead body? She immediately assumes someone has taken it. When she does eventually meet Jesus, she takes him to be the gardener. In verse 9, John fesses up to the fact that he and the other disciples still hadn't understood that the Jewish scriptures pointed forward to the resurrection of God's anointed one. We'll look at more evidence in part 2, but it's worth stopping to reflect on this question. If we don't accept John's eyewitness testimony of the events of Jesus' resurrection, how do we explain these events? Some suggest that Jesus hadn't really died and that he revived in the cool of the tomb. But to believe that, you'd have to believe a long list of things that, when you put them all together, are very hard to believe. You'd have to believe that the experienced Roman executioners had failed at their job, and by doing so, risked being killed themselves. You'd have to believe that Jesus' friends buried him alive. You'd have to believe that Jesus, emaciated after being brutally beaten and then crucified, somehow had enough strength to roll the huge stone that blocked his exit. Then you'd have to believe that he was able to make his escape past the Roman soldiers who had been ordered to guard the tomb with their lives. And then after that, you'd have to believe that he convinced his disciples that all of the above was a lie. But that's not all. You'd still have to explain the empty tomb and the disciples' growing belief. The Romans had nothing to gain from stealing the body, nor had the Jews. They both had wanted him dead. If they had stolen the body, they could have rubbished all talk of Jesus' resurrection by just producing the body. The disciples had nothing to gain from stealing the body either. All of them gave their lives to telling people that Jesus has risen. All but one dies a horrific death defending this truth. If this was a hoax, surely at least one of them would have blown the whistle. The disciples were fearful. They were not expecting the resurrection. They had given up on Jesus. So John's account cannot possibly have been make-believe caused by wishful thinking. In part 2, we'll have a look at another 2 areas of evidence John provides, and then reflect on some really important questions arising. What does it mean for me? Why should I bother? Could it really be that rather than being the end, death is only just the beginning?